Just talk to Carmine. He's ready to settle.
Are you kidding me? Everything's in motion.
Welcome to my world.
So?
I said 40, you said 5.5, which was ridiculous. Let's split the difference. 20%.
15.
You know what? In the interest of putting this shit to bed, if that's what it's gonna take, 15.
Good.
Hola, comrades. Today's topic of interest, The Sopranos. The extent to which The Sopranos changed the entire television landscape cannot be oversold. It is more responsible than any other program for raising television to the level of high art. This is not to say there had not been good television shows before it. This is not even to say there had not been great television shows before it. But television had never before been this ambitious and this invested in creating weighty, dramatic story arcs. Though the landscape is flooded these days with so-called prestige TV shows that merely copy Mad Men or Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones, we should remember that we are better off than we were in the pre-prestige era, where cop procedurals and legal dramas and lowbrow sitcoms were a plague. I much prefer shows that try to be great and fail than shows that are content with being mediocre. Nothing ever changed in those early shows. They never had gravitas. The Sopranos, with its dense thematic ruminations on decay and loyalty and marriage and Catholicism and psychoanalysis, had a lot more on its mind than the likes of, say, Cheers or Friends. Two shows which are not bad, but which represent the lighter era of television that The Sopranos surpassed. I'd much rather have a dozen Sopranos ripoffs than a dozen Cheers ripoffs, even though most Sopranos ripoffs miss the heart of the show and revel in the violence of their anti-heroes. In defense of these ripoffs, so does much of The Sopranos' fan base. There had never been a show like The Sopranos, and despite its tremendous influence on pop culture, there will never be another show like it. The combination of tense familial drama, an intense Goodfellas-like depiction of the messiness of mob life, and Lynchian probing into the twisted psyches of these characters is both exhilarating and unnerving. There are those who hold this show sacrosanct, but I'm not one of them. I was born in 1999, the same year this show started. The world as I have experienced it has always included this show. Nor was this the first major prestige drama I watched. Before it, I watched Mad Men and Breaking Bad, both superior shows. By the time I watched The Sopranos, I had enough experience analyzing and critiquing top dramatic series to pick out noticeable flaws, the largest of which being this show's incredible inconsistency. Episodes like Long-Term Parking and the series finale, Made in America, are some of the best hours of television ever crafted, whereas on the other side, there are episodes like Boca and Christopher that are some of the worst episodes of any truly great television series, right up there with The Great Divide and Bato of the Water Tribe and Avatar: The Last Airbender. Even aside from the truly awful episodes, though, there's an array of episodes that can range from cloying sentimentality to unremarkable vapidity, such as much of the first half of Season 6, aside from the episodes that take place in Tony's coma, and the middle of Seasons 4 and 1. There are some truly hilarious moments in these. The most hilarious taking place in the Season 4 episode, The Wait, wherein Johnny Sack discovers his wife Ginny eating sweets even though she's been claiming that she's trying to lose weight. This revelation is presented with such overblown histrionics relative to what it is that it plays as completely absurd. It's like a soap opera, and not a good one either. I literally started laughing out loud. But I'm not here to denigrate The Sopranos. On the whole, I'd give it 9.5 out of 10. Its always piercing gaze into the decline and confusion of its tormented, emotionally repressed characters is nothing less than fascinating. Its flaws can easily be ascribed to its place in the pop culture landscape. Of course it was going to be heavily flawed. No one had made a show like this before. I'm made to think of a poignant line from Vladimir Nabokov's famous novel poem hybrid, Pale Fire. Referring to a past figure from his country, the King of Zembla, Charles Xavier, says, "It is easy to sneer at Conmal's faults. They're the naive failings of a great pioneer." The impact of The Sopranos was profound. If the series had to endure a few rough patches to make that impact, so what? And its successes are wide and unparalleled. No series has used dream sequences to such disquieting effectiveness. They take Tony's anxieties and paranoias and make of them something abstract and imaginative and ethereal and terrifying. But even more than the dream sequences, The Sopranos' greatest and most underappreciated strength is its exemplary and unsettling use of anti-climax. Before we go forward, though, we ought to define that term. What exactly is an anti-climax? Broadly speaking, it's any scenario where a climax is set up, but before it can occur, it fizzles out. This word has acquired a negative context, and that makes sense. We like climaxes. It's not for nothing that they're one of the definitive tools of art. If you take your family to Disney World, and then the rides are closed, then that is an anti-climax. If you're expecting a party to be awesome, but instead it's only loud and obnoxious, then that is also anti-climax. But anti-climax can be an intentional storytelling device too, and quite an effective one at that. The most explicit example of this is at the end of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. There, the climax is foiled when modern-day cops break up the fighting. It is one of the strangest endings in film history, and though it was devised as a matter of necessity after the film ran out of money, its cleverness is astounding. And then there was the trick pulled by Mockingjay, the final book in the Hunger Games series, later adapted into 2 films, one that seems incomplete, and another that is easily one of the greatest films of the decade. Throughout the course of the series, the reader or viewer is encouraged to believe that they're in on the trick. Sure, those ignorant capital elites are disgusting, and the masses need to be awoken, but I know how this is going to end. The people are going to rise up and overthrow President Snow, and Pan Am is going to become better. Except it doesn't exactly work that way. Mockingjay is not a triumphant story of a courageous resistance triumphing over an evil empire. It's a deeply skeptical story about a young woman who is betrayed by the resistance and has to try to forge her own path after failing to save her sister, even though the only reason she volunteered to be in the titular Hunger Games was to save her. But no work has used the anti-climax with more effective regularity than The Sopranos. The most obvious example of this is during the Season 4 finale, Whitecaps. The entirety of Season 4 has appeared to be building to a massive confrontation between Tony and Carmine, and then that never happens. Instead, the episode centers on Tony and Carmela, who tumble into a vicious fight before finally separating. The Tony and Carmela storyline is set up extraordinarily well, but the setup is subtle. It's easy to see when you're looking for it, but it's easy to miss if you're instead focusing on the showdown that you think you know is going to occur. And then there's the death of Ricky Aprile. There's a certain way characters are supposed to die. It's supposed to be fitting, even when a character's death is jarring and heartbreaking and unexpected, like, say, Ned Stark's in the first season of Game of Thrones. It feels appropriate when you reflect on it in hindsight. In the world of Game of Thrones, for example, mistakes have consequences. If you prioritize honor over practicality, you're going to pay for it. In this, it deliberately sets itself apart from more romantic high fantasy like The Lord of the Rings. I mean, the show ignores that principle later. Jon and Dany make all sorts of mistakes and never pay the price, but that's neither here nor there. What I'm saying is that death, even if it's stomach-curdling, is supposed to feel right and poetic in TV. But that's not the case here. Richie just dies after abusing Janet, Tony's sister. She doesn't stand for his abuse and shoots him. Even when she grabs the gun, Richie cannot believe she's gonna shoot, and for all his character flaws, I can't really blame him. The death was set up well, it makes perfect sense within the established universe, but it still feels wrong and unnatural. Such a great use of anti-climax. Ralphie also dies via anti-climax, for the record. Let's not mince words here. Ralph Cifaretto deserved to die. Even in the universe of vile criminals, Ralph's cruelty stood out. He was a vile cretin. His death was incredibly satisfying, but that it happened when it did is anti-climax. By episode 409, whoever did this, he is at his most sympathetic. His son is in the hospital and he's worried, but Tony kills him over the death of Pio Mai, a horse. and he kills him by accident. So Ralph's death is not intentional, and it occurs when the character has become slightly more likable, and it's over an animal. After everything Ralph has done, what sends Tony over the edge is the death of a racehorse. There's this deliberate attempt to avoid surrendering to expectations in The Sopranos. Traditional hallmarks of mafia media, such as the opposing crime families going to war, or the mouthy underling paying for his insolence, are set up only to be subverted. It is thus ironic that the show maintained a large fanbase throughout its run, and that this fanbase was composed largely of the meatheads and casual viewers whose expectations of what the show is, it constantly undermined. These fans took these intentional anticlimaxes as narrative missteps and continued lionizing Tony Soprano as this brilliant criminal mastermind a la Michael Corleone instead of the broken, trapped head of a family in decline. While the show did help to establish these expectations with the season 1 that was substantially closer to the likes of Goodfellas, it is not to blame for how the fans refused to adjust their expectations of the show and were bamboozled when it traversed into the psychological and the surreal. Death in this show never feels satisfying, morally or artistically. There's always a disconnect between what the show sets up to happen and what it delivers, and this is brilliant. The Sopranos is about paranoia and confusion and dread. Its main character is unable to make sense of his past or present, and can certainly not imagine a future for himself. It ought to feel discordant and anticlimactic. These characters cannot figure out anything but that which is discordant and anticlimactic. This extends to the one death we're denied. Or are we? I'm of course talking about Tony Soprano. The final episode of this show is, from beginning to end, a masterwork. It's a very dark, cynical, nihilistic episode that ends on what appears to be a positive note. Tony eating at a diner, surrounded by the few people he has left after the carnage of season 6. This is who he is. He's not going to change, but he's found something resembling contentment, if only temporarily. The diner is well lit. We hear Journey's famous "Don't Stop Believing." We hear a doorbell ring, and then we cut to black. This is the note the show chooses to end on. Not on triumph or on tragedy, but on anticlimax and ambiguity. This is not the absence of an ending, as some have suggested. This is a deliberate choice, and it is the best ending the show could have possibly had. It's bold, and it's fitting. It's a temporary note of relief in an ocean of sorrow. No, it's not going to last. Whether Tony lives or not, he's going to die eventually, and this is as good as it gets for him. A slight moment of restrained satisfaction that is nonetheless tinged with worry and anxiety. It's a brilliant summation and coda for the show, and it would not have been possible without the use of anti-climax. Great art is not about following through on expectations, but transcending them to make truly powerful statements. And sometimes the best way to do that is to act like you're playing by the established rules, then prove so deftly that you are not. Anti-climax is an art, of course. It's a narrative device, not a defense. You cannot simply fail at writing a climax and say you're writing anti-climax. The whole essence of the device is setting up a great climax and giving every indication that you'll follow through on it, and then very clearly and intentionally choosing to steer away from that. And you have to make sure, and this is extremely important, that you justify the direction you're going in. Don't subvert expectations just for the sake of it, subvert them for a reason. For example, the anticlimax in season 3 of The Americans, wherein the conflict between Phil and Liz over whether to bring their daughter Paige in slowly, or not at all, to the family business, fades when Paige asks for the truth herself, establishes Paige as an independent force in her own right, and not merely a prop for Phil and Liz to fight over, while also indicating that Phil and Liz do not understand her actual problems and concerns. But yeah, I love anticlimaxes, and I wish our collective takeaway from The Sopranos had been to do additional anticlimaxes and dream sequences, and not to flood the landscape with more anti-hero shows. So if you liked what you saw today, consider donating to my Patreon so I can produce even more surprising content. Also, don't forget to like, and comment, and subscribe, all that revelatory stuff. Adios, comrades!